I have met a number of doctors on this trip. Some of them have been private meetings with cardiologists, and some of them were certainly aware there was an issue, but they were hearing it for the first time. But once they heard the evidence, they were able to make a link between what they were seeing and the likelihood that it was driven by the COVID mRNA vaccines. And we're talking about anything and everything that can go wrong with the heart, from heart attacks to cardiac arrests to heart failure to rhythm disturbances.
There are thousands and thousands of doctors who are too shy to come forward. Their names will be put forward, and then they'll be deregistered or whatever. These people should be honored.
I've been very heartened by my conversations with many people in South Africa, especially people on the ground. You know, wherever I go, I speak to, whether it's Uber drivers, shopkeepers. Very consistently, almost everybody I speak to has a story to tell in relation to the COVID vaccines, either of someone they know who's been seriously injured or somebody that's died because of the vaccine. So clearly there's a big disconnect between what the establishment is telling the public and how the public feel.
I expected, media here to welcome a known person interviewed by the world's most influential public, broadcasters. They would look forward to interviewing someone like that and perhaps bring someone who was advising government and protagonist of the vaccine response in COVID and have a debate. Surely that's what democracy is.
They've responded writing smear articles that are completely distortions of his points that he's been making and his history as a cardiologist, and trying just to gainsay everything he says, even without providing any evidence to rebut his points. This has been a pattern in the whole COVID response.
I've always spoken truth to power. Here I feel power is being abused. Our own governments, our own medical regulators are being compromised by funding from Big Pharma or from big foundations. Let's follow the money. Who is benefiting from this entire pandemic response?
Becca Cisa, the Daily Maverick, News 24. They are lying to the public. They are knowingly fabricating stories to attack opposition who raise valid points. These people have blood on their hands, and they are aiding and abetting the capturing of our public health and medical and media institutions by these corrupt pharmaceutical firms. The firms that have the biggest court awards against them, who have a litany, a track record of systematic misrepresentation of the efficacy and safety of their products, stretching back decades.
The reaction to John or myself engaging with Dr. Malhotra is quite out of sorts. And you can't be, as an MP, shying away from the uncomfortable conversations, because our role in South Africa and across the world as members of parliament is to shape policy. And if this is where we're finding ourselves at, then I raise a red flag to where South Africa is going. The idea of cancel culture is a real one in South Africa, and that it is so easy to cancel someone out because they have an ulterior view. And we've got to stand up for that.
Alan Mundi's response to the Malhotra presentation absolutely typified the kind of response we've seen to all of our work and evidence presentation. It was replete with ad hominem attacks and general broad brush statements about misinformation and disinformation without actually pointing to any specifics. It was quite clear that he hadn't studied the presentation or listened to its contents.
I think what I would say to Mr. Windy is he needs to look at the evidence himself. He wasn't at the talk, so therefore it's very difficult for him, I think, to make an informed decision about what actually is going on, because one of the least talked about but most serious side effects, in my view, of the COVID mRNA vaccine is delusion of benefit. Changing one's mind is a very terrifying experience for many people, but the evidence is very clear.
You know, Robert F. Kennedy says that the difference between democracy and totalitarianism is one, that in democracy you have the freedom to engage. In totalitarianism, you don't. We need to stand up for a democratic South Africa. Many, many people in South Africa died in the name of a democratic South Africa, in the name of democracy. we must not take our freedoms for granted. And as an MP, I stand up for the right to freedom of association as any other South African. And I stand up for John to have his right to freedom of association as a South African, first and foremost.
We have to stop this and get it back to what we fought for. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of control over our own bodies and what we put into it. And people like Aseem are stalwarts because they bring the light and they shine the torch where people don't want to be seen. And so we expose the rot.
I am concerned about the effect of the vaccines and South Africans' health status. The information that I've been reading consistently for the last 2 years is not good. With these Pfizer documents, does raise red flags. I would ask now for an investigation into the latest Pfizer documents that have been released to the public, and for us to be able to open up a new South African investigation to get doctors together and start to have the conversation.
I think that, my experience here in South Africa has only reinforced my faith in humanity. There's a lot of very open-minded people here, passionate people who want truth, they want justice. And certainly that I felt that in abundance. Wherever I've gone to speak, probably perhaps more than anywhere, I felt it in South Africa.
Some people have been affected by these vaccines. And if that's the case, how do we manage the process? This is not about pointing fingers. It's about us being able to slow down, look, and shift and move in the right direction. And we owe that to South Africans that may have lost their lives.
I'm a grandfather. And as a grandfather, my priority is taking care of the health of not just my grandchildren, but for the millions of children that are still to be born. That is why I'm standing here alongside Dr. Aseem Malhotra, because here's a man that has the courage to stand for what he believes in.
South Africa actually has a very special place in my heart for a number of reasons. South Africa has played a major role in the world in two of the most historical revolutions for truth and justice in our lifetime. And I think that South Africa, given that history, actually can play a major role in this global need, greater than ever, for truth and transparency in health. And I genuinely think that they are going to be leading that movement. I think that very soon we are going to have legal cases, because ultimately we need to change the law so that this never happens again. And I feel that this may actually start in South Africa.
The importance of a visit like Dr. Malhotra's is that it's a key ingredient in elevating the profile of the whole fraud that has been perpetrated on an unsuspecting public during the COVID phenomenon. It's important to do this because behind the scenes, the World Health Organization and our governments are at the moment attempting to make the kinds of policy responses that we saw during the COVID phenomenon, all of which failed to produce any benefits, permanent. They want to be able to roll out lockdowns on an international basis, not when there is a pandemic, but when the World Health Organization decides that there might be a threat of one. It is clear that the intention is to repeat the trick, and the public needs to wake up to this reality before such events are visited upon our shores again.
I think ultimately we all have a role to play. If we are not part of the solution, then we are part of the problem, and there will be no solution. And I think the most important thing we can all do is to ask the right questions, seek the truth, and then act on it. Knowledge without action is vanity, action without knowledge is insanity, but wisdom without courage is fruitless. So it's time for all of us to act with more courage so that we can ultimately do the best we can for the future of humanity and for our children.